Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/beat and browse an unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/BEAT.
And I see the robin.
I'm just searching for equality, looking for some reason, no finding no apologies. But I do want opportunity, hard work, it ain't new to me.
Hey everybody, it's your girl Rach Da Gem back for another episode of Melanin Boulevard. This week we are joined by Jerome Myers, investor, educator, just all around great guy. Let's get talking to him and let's get to know him today. How are you doing today?
Amazing. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for reaching out. There was a podcast episode that was put out last week. I joined in on the Black Equity Network, and we kind of were talking about, we touched on like Black media. And before we get started, I just want to ask you, what made you reach out? Why did that hit
It struck a nerve. It struck a nerve, right? Because the space that I'm in is dominated mostly by Caucasian men, right? And so they're all the ones that have microphones. And I've been invited on a ton of different platforms, spoken at some really large events, but when it comes back to the community of people of African descent, I don't have much traction, if any. And so I wanted to, when I heard you guys say, hey, people are turning us down, I was like, well, I don't ever get invited on. So can we make this connection? Because I love to educate our people, right? If they're interested in this asset class or this approach to earning a living, I want them to know, because the fact of the matter is we didn't know when we got started that we could actually do this. And then I started looking around and I realized a lot of people were preying on folks, right? They were making false promises. And some of the folks that had microphones, in my opinion, shouldn't, because they're not being genuine in their approach. And so I want to see people win, not figure out how I can pad my pocket. Should I make money in the stuff that I'm doing? Yeah, I think if you're creating value, you should make money. But I don't think you should make money on false promises. And so I want to share that message with as many people as I can, so that when they make that decision to buy, they're actually buying something of value instead of being sold snake oil, because I don't think that's something, especially for those people who are trying to create wealth, I don't think they should be doing, right? I don't want us to be taken advantage of because we don't know any better. That's a struggle for me.
Definitely. I could definitely see that, where we're, maybe just educating ourselves in the line of business that you work in, and we don't know the ins and outs, or, sometimes it takes learning experience to find out what to do and what not to do. And having someone there to tell us hey, watch out for this is something that's definitely not necessary. And the fact that, that podcasters aren't reaching out to you, is odd to me, Black podcasters to be specific. It's odd to me because there are a lot of people who are kind of advertising multi-family, ownership and investing. Are they talking to Black podcasters? Or, who are they talking to? How are we getting this out? How are we getting this information out to the people that look like us? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, I don't think people are actually advertising to us just because of the wealth gap, right? And people that actually have been able to climb out of that and are high income earners or been able to reach that millionaire status, they're mostly hanging out in places that a lot of the folks that places that we traditionally hang out in aren't, right? Like Facebook, Instagram, majority of people are on LinkedIn. It's just a totally different network. The following and engagement that I have on LinkedIn compared to the following and engagement on Instagram, two totally different worlds. But I'm talking about things that I guess a lot of people on LinkedIn, either they haven't found me, or not LinkedIn, but Instagram, they haven't found me, or they're not interested in the conversation I'm having, right? And so I think it's probably just more of the targeting, right? From an income perspective, we're looking for 6-figure earners. Are they on Instagram? Yeah, but are they going on Instagram to learn about investing in real estate? Probably not, right? They're going to catch up on the latest news or gossip or what happened with their friend. They're not trying to get educated. They're going to be entertained. And so I just think it's a very different conversation because, you know, I'm probably not that. I know I'm not that. I'm not an entertainer. I can
Mhm.
be entertaining, but I'm not an entertainer. And so, but I am an educator, right? I can help people figure out how to put that process together so that they can get to where they want to go if they're willing to do the work and make the sacrifices necessary to have it. And I don't have the microwave talk, right? You know, I'm very much oven, crock pot, slow cooker, because I think that's how you actually keep your wealth. You
Mhm.
buying a lottery ticket and getting rich, you end up poor, probably worse off than you were before.
Yeah.
Building wealth through creating a business or audience aggregation and being able to sell to that audience or allow advertisers or promoters to come in and market to that group, you know, that's something completely different, and not a whole lot of people get that. So, you know, I think that's part of the conversation, but, you know, I'm not sure what it is or why I haven't really had that much traction in the space.
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, I can agree with you. It's a completely different audience on Instagram versus LinkedIn. I'm trying to build up my LinkedIn. You know, it's kind of like something where I'm like, where do I fit in this world? You know, so that's kind of what I'm trying to find out now. But I can definitely see the value in being on a platform like LinkedIn. It's very important in whatever industry you're in. I think maybe a lot of people think LinkedIn are for, you know, super professionals, you know, corporate people, business owners. But there's a lot of value for all industries. So I definitely urge people to check that out because I'm on there trying to navigate, trying to figure out how to how to work this. It's kind of like learning a new, like when Instagram came out, you had to learn it. So that's where I'm at right now. Before we get into, because I want to talk about this slow cooker. I like how you said that. Before we get into that, let's let everyone know what you do, and why you decided to educate people.
Yeah, so I buy broken apartment building businesses, right? And it's like there's a lot of words in there, Jerome. Do you need all of them? And the answer is yes, right?
Mm.
So a lot of people are familiar with buying a home and hey, I'm gonna buy a house and I'm gonna rent it out, right? That's the way they think about it. But a lot of individuals or like small groups of people own apartment complexes. And most people don't even really understand that. And if I take it all the way back to college, me and my buddy Duran were sitting on the stoop and we were doing the math because that's what engineering students do in their free time. They just do math. What we were doing, we were counting the money. So I was paying $395. I had two roommates paying $395. He had the same thing going on downstairs at his apartment. When we multiplied it all out, the owner of the complex was making $700,000 a year top line. We never talked to him. We never seen him. And we were like, how does one do this, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want our money decoupled from our time. And you know, if I go all the way back to the roots, like I'm the son of a soldier and stay-at-home mom, there was no conversations around the dinner table about spending a few $1,000,000 on a property so that it sends money back to you every month, right,
Yeah.
on the subscription service.
Mm.
So, you know, I went off and went and did the corporate thing for a while and I moved through corporate America. And I really appreciate you asking me this question because I've never actually been able to answer it the way that I'm about to. And so, like, I built a $20 million division for this Fortune 550 company,
Mm.
right? We went from 2 employees to like 175. We were super profitable, like 30% margins. And my reward for that was laying half the workforce off, right? We didn't need everybody. And I was like, we just made $6 million in profit. We got to figure something out. Yeah, pick your team because you still have to go do this next year. And if you don't pick the people, somebody else is going to pick them for you. And so, you know, I spent between Christmas and New Year's doing that. And
Mm.
that was miserable for me. It was the first time having to do it. And it's just not something I ever wanted to do again. Fast forward to Thanksgiving, same scenario, similar numbers from a profitability standpoint, but now I got to lay people off again. It's like I'm a corporate America dropout at this point. I don't want to have somebody else tell me that I got to lay people off when I see they're working their heart out and doing their best. And
Mm.
so I left, moved into real estate, had some fits and starts there. But the thing that's important for me is like when I look to the left and the right, I didn't have any friends that were doing similar things from a career perspective, right? And so I was just doing my thing quietly. If you go back through social media, like when I was on Instagram, like you would never see my face. And one thing that I learned, and it really hit home in like recent times, like during coronavirus, was that I was part of the problem, right? We see all these people of other races killing it. They're on platforms. They're using microphones from different communities and sharing their message.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nobody who looks like me, right? I played football in college. I got dreads and tattoos, right? Like you don't think of that person when you think about owning multi-million dollars in real estate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You put me on the block with the rest of the boys and I probably fit in really well with them. But with that said, I can go into a boardroom and have the same conversation with those same people, right? It's just a matter of what clothes you have on in that space. But the whole message for me is like, if we're killing it, especially people of African descent, we don't want anybody to know. It's like we've got this drug dealer mentality where we can't let anybody know that we're doing well financially because we're scared somebody's going to ask us. But the fact of the matter is, when you actually share that experience, when you tell your story, there's so many people that can learn from it, be inspired by it, and get that confidence or belief that they can actually do it themselves, right? And so that's why I started educating, because it's like I didn't know how to do it. I had to go figure out how to do it. And I see all these other people making these false promises to people, telling them they're going to teach them how to do it or show them how to do it. And then they don't. And what ends up happening is they buy a used BMW, but they don't actually have the car. They just have the bill, right? Because they don't actually buy the business, right? And so I talked about broken apartment building businesses. Like with a single family home, you buy it, you put somebody in it. That's kind of the end of the story. With an apartment, you're operating it. You got expenses. You've got all of the capital investment. You got all these different moving parts that you're working through.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just so happens that that business is attached to some real estate, right? The subscription agreement is the person paying the rent in the unit. And so the banks like that hard asset. So they're willing to lend a lot of money there. And so I'm putting all that together and being able to enjoy all of those benefits of being a business operator, but having the ability to put some big debt on it because it's a hard asset.
So when you say broken apartment complexes, can you explain that a little?
Yeah. So like you go through and you look at a profit and loss statement and you expect things to have certain percentages based on the amount of income they're generating.
Mm-hmm.
And so for instance, let's say, if we relate it back to single family homes, a property manager is going to charge you 10% of whatever they collect each month to manage that home for you, right? If you've got repairs and maintenance, you budget that. Let's call it 10% of whatever your total collected revenue is for the year. And so we go in and we look for things that are not commensurate with what you would expect for an apartment that's operating well. And so maybe they're paying utilities and the utility bill is really high, whether it's water or electricity. So how can we fix that? Are there leaky toilets or faucets that are dripping? We can go through, eliminate those. And by reducing that expense, but keeping the income the same, you grow your net operating income. And by growing the net operating income, you increase the value of the business, right? And so regardless of whether you've just got a regular business or a business tied to real estate, they're valued based on how much money you make after you pay all of your operating expenses. And so what we look for is ways to either increase the revenue or decrease the operating expenses so that that net operating income grows. And to put things in perspective, say I save $100 over the course of the year. Let's call it $1,000 over the course of the year.
Mm-hmm.
There's this thing called a capitalization rate. And let's say the capitalization rate for that property is 10%. That $1,000 that I added to the net operating income would increase the value of the property by $10,000.
Right.
And that you can do that, the more that you can drive up the price or the value of the property. And then you can do one or two things. You sell it and take all the profit off the table, or you can refinance it, and the initial money that you put into the business, you can take that back out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just play with what we call house money by doing it that way.
Okay. So that system really applies to kind of all businesses. It's trying to keep the expenses low and grow your net profit. It's just in an apartment complex,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I kind of want to dive into that slow cooker mentality. A lot of people think that it's, from what I've seen, maybe because it's just the people that I follow, there's people out there that are kind of talking about like multifamily units and investing in properties and finding these houses and taking over tax, with all that talk, and they make it look really easy. Like, I'm gonna go buy this property today. I'm gonna flip it. I got 30 days, 45 days, and then and then I'm good. So that narrative that it's easy or that it doesn't take time maybe isn't as accurate. And so I like that you said you are not microwave, you're more slow cooker. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody, like, if you're doing any real estate transaction, unless you're buying with your own cash, like, it's going to take 30 to 45 days for you to get to close, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's after you're actually under contract. There's probably 6 to 9. I know one guy who is really successful in the space of wholesaling. It took him 2 years to do his first deal.
Wow.
But nobody tells you that when they're selling you their quick course, or they're selling you coaching, or they're selling you whatever else. They tell you, oh yeah, you can do it and it's super easy. But I mean, I think the most of your listeners have rode a bike before, right?
Mm-hmm.
How hard was it to ride a bike the first time you got on it, right? First time you
Stressful.
training wheels off. You're wobbly. Hopefully somebody's behind you running, holding the seat. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff going into that so that you don't get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this the same way, right? You're going to be super wobbly. And if you don't have somebody helping you, you're going to crash. And you're going to scrape up your knees. You might bump your head. You're going to have some issues. And some people, they're proud of their scars, right? They're glad that they had those bumps and bruises because they didn't give it to somebody else. Like, there's a certain amount of pride on figuring it out on their own. But what if you could go further quicker and actually like climb the whole mountain instead of getting halfway up?
Mm-hmm.
Like, people will be glad that they lost money on the deal instead of paying somebody to coach or guide them through that. And so they're making a rookie mistake, right? Something that somebody could have saved them from, instead of getting somebody to take them further up the mountain and making a more aggressive mistake. And the thing with multifamily that scares a lot of people is the price tag is bigger, right? And so, if I go back to my first deal, had I been successful at getting that deal on my own, I would have been bankrupt because we went over budget on some stuff and we needed more money. And that amount of money that we needed exceeded my capacity, right? With all my credit lines, with all my cash, like, it exceeded my capacity. And so if you don't have the right people around you, that's what you're setting yourself up for. You're setting yourself up for a train wreck because there's so much that you don't know. And, I've been using this metaphor recently because I think it makes a lot of sense and it's applicable to every business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, I'm going to start doing MMA fighting, right? My first fight is with Conor McGregor. You know Conor McGregor, right? The Irish, right?
Yep.
So I need you to write me a check for $100,000 so that I can go in and get to the fight, get my hotel, have the entourage there and everything. And I'm going to split the proceeds from me winning with you, right? Now, all I've done is listen to podcasts, watch YouTube, and read books, right? I don't have a trainer, I don't have a coach, I don't have any of that. I'm just going to go in and me and Connor one-on-one. You going to write that check for me?
I'm not. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that
But
based off you winning.
we treat business like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't actually get the coach. Like, you're dealing with professionals, you're dealing with really large properties, you're dealing, or whatever the big idea is. And we think that we don't actually need to have somebody consult with us to walk on that journey with us, right? And it's just not practical. And if you look at the biggest successes, like they may have gotten far enough. My mom used to call it pushing your car, right? We were driving past a person who had a disabled vehicle, and they were just sitting in the car with their flashers on, and nobody was helping them. Everybody was driving around, right? Nobody. And then we saw somebody else, and they got out the car and they started pushing, and then people were stopping, hopping out the car, helping them push it along the way. And so we got to start pushing, but we need somebody. We don't need, but we're a whole lot more efficient if somebody comes in along the way and helps us move the car, right? And I struggle because people think that they're going to run a multi-million-dollar business and they haven't ever done anything similar, and they don't have anybody guiding them along the way. And we've been taught to emulate the result and not the actual process, right? We just want to have the fancy cars or the big house. We don't know the years of work that went into it, and the story of people actually living in their cars and risking everything and all the sacrifice and the things that happen to actually make the thing a big success. So that's
Well, why do you think that people are, I wouldn't say against, but not open to having a team, having someone who knows more than you? Because I'm all for someone being around people who know more than me, because that's a lot of free learning experience just off of having a conversation. I see people more so taking these e-courses and these webinars from people who are just trying to tripwire you into, a bigger package versus reaching out to someone maybe closer that can give you the information that you need to be successful. Why do you think people are more prone to doing the other versus someone closer?
some of it's ego and pride, right? Because you have to say that I know more than you, right? If you're going to come to me and ask me for help, right? That's part of people, their posturing. They don't want anybody to know. The other piece of it is some people just can't afford it, right? I mean, I can't work with everybody. My price point is different than other people's price points. But the one thing that I learned after helping people for low or no cost was it was just a suggestion. There was no pressure to actually get the result because they didn't actually invest anything. And what it showed from my perspective was that I didn't value my time or I wasn't making a smart investment, right? So on my struggle with a lot of people is like, they don't know what they don't know, and they end up being overconfident, and they feel like it's easy. Like for the people who graduated from college, they spent a whole 4 years for a job that they had no idea was going to exist when they started, right? Like when you go through and now you get to the end, you're like, okay, now I need a job. But when it comes to actually creating something specifically, whatever your dream is, whatever you're working on from an entrepreneurial venture, they don't want to do any training. It's like, oh, it's just all in my head. It's all going to come out. But there's a recipe, there's a formula for success. And there's other communities are willing to do that because they've seen other people do it. And it goes back to the example, right? I saw my dad or my grandpa do this. And so I either go ask my dad or grandpa what they did, or grandma, or I go pay this coach over here to do it because I know that they know more about it than I do. They've got that example, and we don't. We tend not to have successful entrepreneurial businesses in our community.
I think people need to understand that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be a business owner in whatever industry you're in, you have to be okay with being a student forever, because there's always something to learn. There's always something, even, you could talk about like a hairstylist. There's always new techniques. There's always new something. You have to evolve with society and with the times. And so I think people think, they can go to school and they get out and then that's it. Be okay with being a student forever. Like, just accept that. someone has to be the teacher, someone has to be the student. And you can be a teacher to someone who knows less than you, but you also still need the teacher that knows more than you. So
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Without question, the hierarchy or the totem pole and trying to see, well, I'm doing better than you, or like that's all nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows more about something in some niche than the other person. And it's okay to tell that person. And in fact, I think we should be doing it, right? We should be celebrating that somebody's an expert,
Yes.
right? That they've paid the price or done the stuff that you haven't done in order to understand that better than you. And why, if you already understand it, why do I need to go figure it out on my own? Like, why can't you curate the content for me, right? And from there, maybe there's some mutual benefit, and I can teach you something on the other side, and we move together. Like I see specifically in the Jewish community, like they keep all the money and they just circle it from place to place. They have an expert in their community that knows how to do stuff, but for some reason, and I was just having this conversation over the weekend, we tend to go do something else. I take it back to the ice is colder, right? Their ice is colder than my ice. Is that real? Like what about ice is colder? We're set on the same temperature in the freezer. Like, what do you mean? But, because it's coming from a different community, they have more credibility. Or because you see more of them doing that, and them is kind of relative, right? But you see more people that look like that doing that, you assume that all of them have the same knowledge or thought process or approach. And that's where it comes back to me being part of the problem, right? If I don't tell people, hey, you can do this and here's how you do it, and be a living example of that, then of course they'll always think that either they don't belong or that, this opportunity doesn't exist for them. And that for me is a part of the problem I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. Can we see the value in each other? Can we see that, we are all experts in our own line of business? I mean, that goes hand in hand with even the statement of the Black media statement. Do we see value? Why are we going over here when we have our own lane right here? Yeah, I like that you talked about the Jewish community, because DJ, actually, you just had an episode with him, recommended I read the book, The Jewish Phenomenon, and it's blowing my mind. It's blowing my mind, and everyone needs to read that. It's so much that we need to learn as a community that can keep us together, strategies and principles that we can set in place that can, elevate us. I'm just going to kind of shift real quick. Your shirt, I took the red pill. I like your shirt. So tell us about that shirt.
Yeah, so I was in a pretty dark place back in 2010, and I started asking all of the uncomfortable questions about what I believe and why I believe, right? And one of my favorite movies was The Matrix. And, I am Neo, I am Morpheus for some other Neos. But the fact of the matter was, like, there were so many things that I was doing because they were tradition or just practice instead of because I truly believed them. And to give listeners an example of something that we do, why do you say bless you when somebody sneezes?
That's just what we were taught. That's what we were
Right?
taught.
But it's meaningless, right? We don't say bless you when somebody coughs, right? Like, I mean, there's just so many things that we do out of ritual. Like people, I don't even really want to go down a path, but I will, right? Like people pray before they eat fried chicken and drink soda. Like you're hurting yourself, but you're praying about it before you hurt yourself. Like there's just so many things that we do just because we saw other people do it. And this is me affirming that I'm living the life that I'm living because I believe in what I'm doing, right? And I've actually tested that this is what I truly believe based on my experience. And I can bring it to racism, right? Like we can get really, really charged and energized around an atrocity over what appeared to be racism. But if you peel back the layers, there could have been so many other reasons why this thing happened. but we don't care about that. We just want to read the headline. Back to like this microwave stuff. Like when we really start doing the digging, and I was listening to your episode about the Netflix and the contribution to HBCUs and so on and so forth. And it's just like, how do we actually dig into and make sure that these things are of meaning instead of just taking the headline and running with it and then repeating that over and over and over again?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is so much to be said for having depth, right? And so few people actually want to be deep. They like to be superficial. They snorkel. And we really should be scuba diving on the things that really matter to us instead of trying to snorkel on everything, because that's the only way that we're really ever going to be experts and truly be able to make a difference from my perspective.
I agree. I definitely have gone on that journey where I'm questioning everything that I was taught. Why do we do this? Why do we say it like that? And I actually never thought about that, bless you, statement. When people cough, we just like, maybe all right, but when they sneeze, it's bless you, God bless you. And yeah, why do we do that? Where did that start? How did that start? We don't care about the coughs? Maybe not. I don't know.
Only a virus.
Right. Yeah. And that could go left real quick. So I wanted to talk about that shirt, and just so people can understand what that means. I feel like everyone should question everything. And in our culture, that's something that is frowned upon, if you want to say it like that. Just to kind of go back to the book, The Jewish Phenomenon, they're taught they teach their children to question everything until they grow up, even questioning their religion and the book that they read. They question it. There's always conversation. But in our community, if we were to question something, let's just say there's going to be questioning about the Bible, we've gone too far.
I question the Bible all the time. And, I grew up Christian, right? My dad was, he's been the head deacon at every church he's attended since I've been alive. And I learned a whole lot about the Bible. And for me, part of that journey was prayer with no answer. And it was just like, okay, let me start asking questions. And I'll never forget going to the slave castles in Ghana and walking up to the church and opening the door that looked like a mail slot to check on where the slaves were, right? The parishioners would check on the slaves before they go into worship.
Wow.
Right? And I can't even call them slaves, right? Because they were just prisoners. They were Africans who were prisoners at a castle where they were transported across the Atlantic Ocean to come to America to build this country, right? And like, I know my tribe, I know where I come from, but there's so few people that are of African descent who actually know their genealogy. They don't know what country of origin. And, we talk about the Jewish religion. I just like the Jewish folks because, like, they walk around, the Hasidic Jews, right? They have their side locks, they have their hats, they have their long black clothes, and nobody challenges or questions that, or nobody says, oh, they're dangerous, or none of that, right?
Right.
But we can have whatever, and it's like, oh, well, they're violent, they're scary, I was scared, and I should do this, that, or the third. And part of it is because, like, I don't think we actually know who we are, because through that transatlantic journey, our heritage was severed. And that part, I think, is something that all people should do. Like, they should question, like, who am I really? Because you're not a slave. Like, there was a whole life before that.
Yes.
Right? There was generations and generations before that. It wasn't until somebody came in and, whether they were prisoners of war or stolen or whatever that happened, that piece entered into the heritage. And then from there, they try to cut everything off and make it so, and using religion as part of it, right, to control the mind and allow you to be mistreated and accept things that don't make sense and allow people to be in an authoritative state when they probably aren't smarter than you or more valuable than you in any other way. And I've struggled with the Black Lives Matter call because I don't want to make it. I think all lives matter, and that makes hair on the neck of people stand up, right? But if there is no differentiation, right? Like, for instance, I'll try to tie this all together. This is the first time I've actually had this conversation. So when I used to go into a consulting client's office, or when I would go into the offices at the different Fortune 500 companies that I worked at, I was always the youngest, and I was always the only brown one, right? And it didn't matter what I did with my hair, whether I was clean shaven, whether I had locks or Caesar, like, I still didn't look like them when I walked in a room. So like, what was I doing? Did I have the same uniform on? Did I have on an Oxford shirt and slacks and some decent shoes? Yeah, but I still didn't look like them. So was I fooling anybody? At the end of the day, like, the humanity of it all, and I think we've forgotten that. Like, love is the only law. And that's what I found in my journey, right? If you can look at the other person and see yourself, it is really difficult for you to harm them, right? And at that point, it changes the decisions that you make about how you're going to do whatever you're going to do. And once we realize, like we're all people, we're all humans, and like, it doesn't matter your skin color, doesn't matter your hair texture, like, none of that matters. It matters how you show up and you engage with people. I think that's when we actually have a chance of healing all of this tension. As long as we're segregated and we're all like beating our chests and making sure, like, I'm different and I want you to know I'm different, I don't think that's where we actually create compromise. All compromise comes from that common thread, and then you embrace the differences, but you know that, like, you love each other, you care about each other.
I read an article, I think yesterday. It was actually about the Black Lives Matter movement and the person who started it. I forget the word that was used, but it was said that she was a person who was trained to basically create social division, right? So I get the statement. I understand the statement. The statement is obviously true. It's something that I don't feel that I should have to repeat because I'm Black. Obviously, I matter. Even in what I do in podcasts, I'm not going to keep repeating that Black Lives Matter because it's apparent. It's apparent that we matter. It's kind of like saying over and over, the sky is blue every time you walk outside. We know that. We know. So how do we, for those who are not accepting, because I don't think the issue is particularly us knowing that there's no different, and we are able to see and empathize with other people and other races about what their struggle is and see ourselves in them. I don't think that's the problem, but how do we break down those walls? How do we get into those rooms?
Yeah, I think it's just being excellent, right? Like, that's been, I keep coming back to this. Like, I was part of the problem by not showing my face to people who look like me and those who don't look like me. There was no normalization of wealth. And I honestly don't think it's a skin color thing. I think it's a have versus a have not thing, right? The people who have not, you can throw them away. You don't care about them. It doesn't matter because they're not significant. They're not famous. They're not important, right? The people who have, we're going to do everything we can. That's why for COVID, we shut down the whole economy, right? Because those people who have were vulnerable to that issue. The virus care how much money you have or what color your skin is, right? And so we're willing to see the humanity of that, right? And me being a young, healthy person versus somebody who's got some compounding effects with, like, if maybe they had pneumonia, they may die just like they would die if they died from COVID. Like, those people who have made those decisions because they're in a place of influence, right? So, how do we change the face of wealth? Because I think that is truly the conversation. And then those people who show up as the wealthy, I think they don't forget the people. And so this is a great example, Rachel, right? So when we go to a lot of the communities that we buy, many of the times we're buying from somebody that doesn't look like the majority of people that live at the property, right? And so when we come in and we see things that aren't fit for the person to be living there, and the person who owns it sees it, they don't see themselves in their residence. So it's okay for it to be that way. Because if I come in and I see him, like, no little kid should live in a room that looks like that, or whatever. The roof shouldn't be leaking, or whatever the issue is, right? So, again, it comes back to the humanity and being able to see ourselves in other people. And then for the people who choose not to do that, calling them on it, right? And make sure that we actually see that. Because I don't ever want to see any unarmed person be killed by the police anywhere, ever, right? It's never okay, regardless of who the person is. And, for us to segregate and say, oh, well, this piece only matters. No, all of it matters. And if you make it so that it's never okay for anybody, it's all taken care of. It's all taken care of. And just like with the housing for us, right? The majority of time, and people have seen it more so in this era that we're in right now than they have in the past. Like, you spend most time in your home. Like, that's your environment the majority of the time. And so if you don't have a quality housing situation, you're creating a healthcare issue.
Yes.
Right? People have asthma, they have psoriasis, they have all these things from the environment that they're living in their home. And so it's important for us as owners of properties to make sure that we are taking care of the property so that people can actually have health, right? Because, shelter's the basic need.
Yeah.
So, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but, I haven't had these conversations because I've been trying. I'm certainly not an expert on any of it, but to reconcile like what I believe and what I don't believe, because the headlines are super sensationalized. I don't think they tell a fraction of the story, and people read those headlines and then they have a position based on the headline instead of any of the deep research that's actually necessary to have an informed opinion.
True. I definitely agree. Now, just to kind of double back, when you first got on Instagram and you decided not to put your face and not to be kind of the forefront of that business, what was your thought process on that?
I thought I was Nike, right? You got all these faceless brands out there, and I wanted it to be bigger than me, right? I didn't want a personal brand. I didn't want it to be about me. And there was true fallacy in that. Like, if there isn't anybody that looks like me doing this, then that's one thing. But for me to look like I look and to do the things that I'm doing, if there's somebody out there that wants to do the same thing, one, I don't want people who are in this space to never have seen anybody doing this credibly, right? Because if you show up and you don't look the part, then people say, well, I don't know if you can actually do it. Well, now they've had this experience with me because I spoke at this national conference or that, and like, oh yeah, he's like Jerome, right? And so now they can have that conversation. And then for the people on the other side who have been looking around and all they see is, certain educators, you're like, oh, no, he's different. Who's that guy? I want to meet that. It gives them opportunity to at least know that somebody else is doing it and is credible.
Yeah, I was going to say, we definitely need more people who aren't, we can just say, assimilating to what corporate America thinks you should look like, stuffy and just not approachable. we need those people who are approachable to kind of open those doors for more people to come in so that they can feel comfortable, because, you know, a regular black person just trying to get into the business may not feel comfortable with approaching, you know, a stuffy person. They may feel judged, and the person might not even be judging them. But if they feel like they can speak to someone who is relatable, who looks like them, who has some tattoos, you know, not that that matters, but someone who is more approachable, personable, I think is important. The reason why I asked you that is because I also I have a marketing company, and working with Black businesses, and hearing Black people say they don't want to be the face of their business because they don't want to be Black owned this, and I get it. I can get it on both sides, right? So that's why I asked you. I'm like, was it that you didn't want to just be the Black owned blah blah blah, or if that you just wanted to be a company doing this?
Yeah, I thought that's what I thought, right? I thought you're a company doing this, right? The big brands are always a company doing this. And then when you think about it, especially if you're going to be an educator, like Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, like I can go down the list, right, of all these people who develop these personal brands. And I think Dave Ramsey's probably done it best, where he's brought all of these different characters to the speaking group, and they're all got their different lines and products and shows, and he's been able to grow it, but he calls them Ramsey personalities, right? And so, you know, opening doors for other people is the game, right? And I don't think many people are playing that game. They feel like the room for me,
Yep.
and I want to sneak in the door in the back, and I'm gonna go let everybody in on the backside, right?
Yeah.
Because if I perform, right, if I perform well, then you're like, oh, well, who else do you know?
Yeah.
Oh, no. You know, a lot of people aren't willing to have that conversation. They're not willing to place that bet.
Mhm.
And I'm willing to have that conversation. I want to place that bet. I want to open the door. I want to increase the diversity in the space. I don't know how we don't, right? I've met so many people over the past 6 months who make over $200,000 a year, who are just as brown as could be, and most people would probably look at them and be like, "Oh yeah, you make 50 grand a year, you make 30 grand a year," and it's just like, no, like, this guy isn't of African descent. He's of Indian descent. I met him, and like, he's worth 300 million.
Mm.
Like, he had me come to his house and stay with his family for a few days. Like, there's just so much happening, and nobody's sharing the story. There is no media coverage for these amazing stories that I get to encounter,
Mm.
right? And so it's just like, what world do you actually live in? And I have to walk through that every single day. And it goes back to the red pill. Like, what is my reality, and who am I letting shape it, right? Because the news will tell you how you're supposed to feel,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't mean that you really feel that way. And so, you know, being deliberate and making your own decisions, I think that's what life is all about.
Yeah. Know when you're being manipulated and just cut it. I don't watch a lot of news because of that. As we kind of tie it up, I want to talk about Meyers Method. What is that?
Yeah, so it sounds really braggadocious, right? James Bryant, he's been a partner, and he's actually my coach and one of my best friends in the entire world. We started doing this stuff, and we started creating our system on how we're going to buy apartments. And so he was like, "Oh, we're using the Myers methods." I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, that's nonsense. Stop saying that." He's like, "No, using the Myers methods." And he went on for about a month and a half, and he's like, "Okay, all right, I'll just let it go," right? And then he's like, "Okay, so what are we doing?" And so we find it, we fund it, we fix it, and we flip it. So it's our 4-step process for buying apartment buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
We find it, meaning we identify what type of property we're looking for. Then we fund it. So we do all the due diligence. We bring all the partners together to put the money into the pot so that we can pay the down payment and have some working capital. And then we fix it. which is the actual improvement of the whatever was broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not working like it's supposed to. We buy it, then we fix it. And when we fix it, that's when we grow the valuation of the property, right? Expanding the net operating income, like we talked about early on in the show. And then the final step is flipping it. And this is a piece where I was saying you either rehab it or refinance it, or you sell it to somebody else. And that allows you to get your initial money back out or make a big profit by harvesting the equity from the property. And so, that 4-step process is the way we do it. And we sprinkle in the values that I hold, where we're talking about the love, the humanity, and wanting to improve the community, not just make money off the community. Right. My man Dame Dash talks about culture vultures, right? Where people are just praying, but like we want to water the vine. We don't just want to take the fruit off of it. And so how do you do that? Will you still make money in the business? And so that's the way we think about it.
I like that method. When I think of like apartment complexes, because I'm here in Las Vegas and we have some pretty big complexes out here. So when you go and you find these properties, are they like multiple like buildings? Or are you buying one building at a time? How are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, every complex is split up, however it's split up, right? And so some people buy stuff as small as 5. Other people, know the guy that I was just telling you about, the Indian guy, him and his dad bought 800 units at one time,
Wow.
right? And so, that that's probably one of the largest deals that I've seen bought by like independent operators. You got people like Blackstone and other folks who will buy bigger portfolios, but it's just a function of what you have capacity for, right? How much balance sheet do you have, and those things will determine how much loan you can get, which will then decide what type of property you can take down.
So when people decide to get into this business, they don't have to feel the pressure of having access to the funds to purchase 10 buildings. They can start with 1. They can start with, 5 units. They can start with 10 units. They don't
Yeah.
have to, go out and get the 100. So not to deter them from getting into the business.
Yeah. And I mean, so every investor is trying to solve 4 problems, right? And I'm telling them the order that they have to solve them in, because this is a part that messes a lot of people up. The first one is knowledge, right? So get educated, make sure you understand what you're doing. You apply that knowledge to leads, and that'll give you deal flow, right? Deal flow is the number of opportunities you have. It's no different than any other business where you're trying to, get people into the funnel. You want to get the properties into the funnel so you can evaluate them. After you evaluate them, you want to have somebody around that has experience. Remember, I talked about somebody holding a bike and running behind you to make sure that you don't crash. And then the final thing is the capital. Many people go to capital first, and it's at the top of the stack, right? You need to find a way to get educated. Once you're educated, you need to go find a deal. If you find a deal, experience will show up, and then experience attracts money, right? And so people are trying to get the money and they're putting the cart before the horse. Go back to my Trevor McGregor conversation, right? You're not going to see me that check. But, if I'm one of those other guys that's been out there, or, if I'm Floyd Mayweather and he's going to box Floyd instead of the MMA fight with Floyd, you might send that check because you think Floyd's going to win. And so, we just need to make sure that we're being practical in our approach, because that is what makes money. These Hail Marys that a lot of people throw trying to get rich quick don't actually work, right? It's the really simple things that work well.
I agree. I think they're maybe getting rich off of telling people they're going to get them rich versus actually working the business. So people have to watch out for that. I've definitely taken some courses and I left the course like, so what do I do now? Did I learn anything? I have a bunch of notes of what they said, but is there anything that I can actually apply to what I was trying to get at? And I'm like, no, there was nothing. I just wasted my money. But you have to learn that. You have to make the create the relationships, meet the people, so that you can learn from people that have hands-on experience that can guide you.
Yeah.
So I I want to thank you so much for taking time out and sharing. It was a lot of things that we touched on that I think people need to know about, especially when it comes to business. Let everyone know where they can find you if they want to learn from you. And I know you said you also have a podcast, so let them know where they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity to share. So if you're interested in learning more about the multifamily investing, hop over to myersmethods.com, MYERSMETHODS.com. And there you can get our free 4-step guide on how to get started. And then there's also a 15-minute podcast to give them some education on why we tell people to do joint ventures over syndication. The hot thing right now is syndication. Is how you can do a deal with none of your own money, none of your own credit, and all the other stuff where you don't actually have to add any value but still make money. We tell people why that's not the way to go. For the people who want to connect and on social, I'm on LinkedIn, Jerome Myers. I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. And we've got 2 podcasts. One's called the Dream Catchers Podcast. And on that one, we tell the stories of people who have exited the matrix. And so whether that's leaving corporate America or just leaving that old reference of thinking behind, and they've evaluated a new way of living life, we tell those stories and give you the actionable steps so that you can make that journey as well. And then we've got a podcast called Multifamily Missteps, where we take away all of that HGTV stuff people are used to seeing, where everything's perfect and everybody makes money, and we bring real life operators on to tell war stories, right? How did they mess up? What would they do different next time? And by doing those 2 things, I think we allow people to get into the space eyes wide open instead of being promised something that can actually materialize.
I love it. I'm definitely going to check it out. Make sure you guys follow him. And I know there's a lot of people out there interested in multifamily ownership and flipping and all of that. Get with somebody who looks like us and don't be HGTV'd out here, because that's not real. So make sure you guys tune in and make sure you check him out, follow. Make sure you tune in to Melanin Boulevard every Thursday. Don't forget to tell your friends to tell their friends, and maybe we could be friends to tune in every Thursday to Melanin Boulevard. Thanks, guys. Bye.